Right, we're rolling. Okay. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Lifters League podcast, the Strength and Muscle Science podcast. I'm Ben Ashmole. I'm here with, as always, Gus Cook, and we also have a couple of guests. Gus, if you want to introduce them for me.
So today we have, first we have Sarah. She's one of my competitive powerlifters, and and we also have Jay Kelly, who is, what do you call it again? A high performance.
High performance liaison officer. Sounds really fancy, but my role is to just work with the sort of professional teams that we have at GymAware and Flex overseas mainly. 90% of our clients are actually overseas. So I just work with the strength coaches day to day to sort of facilitate them and help them with anything that they need, like if it's running them through the system or, just helping them with their issues every day. So that's kind of my role. Obviously I have Australian teams as well, but yeah, that's kind of what I do at the company.
So if people are unaware what we're referencing to, this is the velocity-based devices or velocity-based training with GymAware and what's the other one? FlexStronger, do you call it? Or
yeah, Flex.
I've just been calling it Flex.
So the company's Kinetic Performance, right?
Yeah, the company's Kinetic Performance. So we sell two products. The first one is GymAware, and we've been selling that to pro teams, universities, high performance institutions, researchers. Like we have a massive client base, and we've kind of been doing that for about 15 years now. So like we have...
Why has this been...
Yeah, go on.
Why has this device been better than, I guess, some of your competitors? Because this one's, I've noticed, has really taken off in many industries, and a lot of other ones have.
Well, do you want to start with... Sorry, for people listening, like my mind was blown when Gus explained to me what velocity training is and the kind of gains he's been able to make with his athletes is ridiculous. So could you just give us a rough overview of what it is?
Yeah, okay. So I think the easiest way to sort of explain it is velocity-based training is just using a device, which, there's quite a few of them, but essentially using a piece of technology that tracks speed of movement. So whether it's mainly for barbell exercises. So if we know how fast an athlete's moving, we can sort of make decisions on how they're performing on that day. So like as we know, like athletes are under a lot of stress all the time, and so these daily stresses can actually impact their training. So things like sleep, hydration, nutrition, relationships, work. There's a lot of stresses that can come into an athlete's life. So instead of using like a traditional method of like, okay, you're going to just lift 60% of your 1 rep max or 80, 90%, we actually use velocity to dictate the load. So if an athlete comes into the gym, they're feeling crap, they put 90% on the bar. Using velocity, we can sort of tell how fatigued they are for that day, and then go, okay, well, today let's actually back off the weight because your speeds are down, and then you're not risking injury. So that's kind of the main reason why someone would use velocity-based training in the pro setting. But then there's all these other areas. So like one of them is obviously increase intent to lift. So that's like a main one. Increase like competition as well. So like GymAware first came around in 2002, and it was actually only used as a readiness sort of measure. Like it was just used for jump testing. So athletes would come in, they'd do 3 jumps, and then based on those jumps, you can kind of tell how fatigued someone is on that day. But then as the product evolved, we added all these other features, and it just kind of took off from there. In a nutshell, velocity-based training is essentially, using velocity to dictate the load, I believe.
Right.
What's your definition?
How are you using it, Gus? Sorry, Gus. How are you using it with your athletes specifically?
Pretty much exactly how he's explaining it. Is that we'll put the device on the bar for your main list in terms of powerlifting. We'll structure it with our current programming. We'll create a profile for that athlete, a velocity profile, which basically is a linear regression model that kind of correlates percentage of load to the velocity, and with that we're able to determine the load on the day based off that velocity for that day. So if we've programmed at 80%, it might give us a velocity of say, 0.4. We will see, basically we'll come as close to that weight as we can. And if we are slower that day, we'll work at a lighter load until we are roughly at that 0.4. If we're performing really well and which means the training we're probably doing is progressing and working, or they're having a really good day. And depending on the consistency of session to session over the weeks, we might have a progressive increase in load at the percentages we're working at. So yeah, in the end, we might find that her projected 1RM is increasing over time, and that we just respond to the velocity of that, So if we basically want to work at 85%, which is generally kind of an ideal range, we do working in powerlifting. And if that speed constantly increasing at those percentages, well, then we know we're getting stronger. We know we're training in more of those optimal ranges. Because if things get too easy, if she's getting stronger and things get too easy, we're not creating the right stimulus to constantly progress that strength. So we kind of limit our progression by not understanding where we're at in our training as well.
So what kind of gains are we talking, just out of interest, like in terms of numbers?
So we applied it with Sarah here, kind of the first time I used it as an experiment, and we applied it to all the lifts really, and we had a kind of a massive increase. So we started where I would rely on subjective information such as, their energy levels, how they're feeling, and basically looking at videos to see, comparing them over time. So if I look at one lift to another lift, does that look better than the week before? But now that's all subjective, where velocity was objective. And we went from, during one training phase over 6 months, we went from a 230 squat to a 257 and a half
Over how
kilos.
6 weeks.
6 months.
6 months. Well, I was going to say 6 weeks.
6 weeks would be all right. Yeah, but 6 weeks.
Yeah, sign me up.
I think a massive contributor that I noticed is that we are able to stay in the right training range, or the right stimulus range, because she would progress, but we can't really maximize that progression because the stimulus isn't going to be right for the current strength level she's currently at. So I would have to make these kind of these guesses about where she is going because of things might be starting to feel too light. So we're not getting that right stimulus. And I think this is why we're able to make such faster progress, and then knowing when to back off as well, because then you can start accumulate too much fatigue, and without the recovery, you don't make progress either. So it's a win-win on both ends.
Yeah. And I think
So Joe,
go on.
Oh, sorry, go on. No, you go.
I was going to say I think that's a really big thing people don't understand, is that fatigue accumulates, and all of a sudden it gets to a point where you're actually overtraining, and it becomes a negative thing. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Louis Simmons. You probably are. I think he trains his athletes. I'm not sure. He does the dynamic method. Works above 0.75, and that's actually to help his athletes recover while they're sort of making gains. My sort of main area is focused on football, NBA, all those sort of other sports. So I haven't had too much experience with powerlifting specifically, but I know that VBT is huge in it, and that's what I'm seeing. Working with guys like yourself, Team Power Elite down in Sydney. You got all of these Aussie guys making massive gains just from training, and understanding where they're at on that day, and adjusting things for the day. Yeah.
The other one in Sydney was it Laura Scrow, isn't it? Is that the one you were?
Yeah, pocket rocket. Yeah.
And is there much other people doing velocity-based powerlifting in
I
Australia?
honestly think it's starting to take off a bit more in powerlifting, especially, and that's sort of an area we've tried to target powerlifters, because I actually think you do 3 main lifts. Like the teams that I'm used to working with, a coach might have 500 athletes, so it's really hard for them to create force velocity profiles for each athlete. Get really specific training programs and all that stuff. But for a powerlifter, they just have to do it for themselves. And they're only focusing on increasing 3 main lifts. So I actually think it suits them quite well, this new training method.
So what are some of the, obviously you said you work with a lot of team sports clubs and stuff. Where is it most utilized, and is it mainly in the US?
Yeah, so mainly in the US. So we have, we have teams like Boston Red Sox, Philadelphia Eagles, like top. We're talking like top teams. So, yeah, like we have over 20 baseball teams, 20 NBA, 15 NFL, sort of over 20 hockey. So, like, these guys are using it every day for every lift, sort of thing. Like, that's how popular velocity-based training is in team sports, because when you're dealing with athletes that are worth so much money, you kind of need to make sure that they're not overtraining, you know what I mean? And having that objective measure there, it's like, okay, now we know. We compare it with all this other data. All right, we're backing off today because we're not risking it, sort of thing. Especially.
So are they measuring this individually as a team?
Sorry?
Are they measuring this individually or as a team?
Yeah, so individually. The good thing about the GymAware obviously is, you can have unlimited athletes in the system. They just go up, pick their profile, all the data's sent to the cloud. They can generate reports on individual athletes, and they can pretty much just see where they are on the day. So, yeah.
You don't want to be the strength and conditioning coach who blows out LeBron James's knee. Do you? Could you imagine that? Yeah.
Oh, it's like, not
because. So I mean, how they
NBA teams, they play 82 games a season. Like, it's a very short season, and they have finals. They're playing every 2 days. So, you still need to get that quality work in. You still need to be training for, like Gus was saying before, making sure you're training the right stimulus, but without fatiguing your athletes, so they can come in and they can do it the next day and the next. You know what I mean?
Because what are they doing to test them for that day?
For that day, they just mainly work with the zones. So that's kind of how they do it. They program with the individual zones. So on the GymAware, you have the blue target zones. So each individual will have their zone set up, and then if they're dropping below the speed, they just bump the weight back. And if they're over the speed as well, so this is another point, I guess. Like, some days an athlete will come in, they feel amazing. Instead of holding them back, like I think Gus, you were saying before, okay, let's go for it. Let's get the work in today because you're feeling good. So that's generally how they do it. They work with the blue zone, and it's just all specialized for that.
For what I know from these zones, they're quite a lot larger than what we're working with, aren't they? So what are these zones? I mean, because we're working with very fine numbers. I mean, we're down to 0.01 in our measurements.
Yeah. So
we might work in a zone between, say 0.35 and 0.38.
Yeah. Wow.
So they're very tiny, but the thing is, advanced powerlifters are generally quite consistent as well.
Yeah.
With their speed. So, I mean, can you tell us a bit about how these zones work? Because I know they're a lot larger.
Yeah. So just a question about your zones. Like, how many reps would you be doing? Is it what, for 0.35 to 0.38?
So we'll have a range. We'll have about a 2.5 to 5% range outside of, I guess, the selected percentage we're working at for that day, and then we just try to be within that range, and we only really measure the first repetition. So we're not doing any more. We're not doing. Generally, we never do any reps that are going to put us into that we're going to have significant velocity loss in our ranges. So we only do like 3, maybe 5 reps, and then would only ever measure the first rep, because for us the skill is only comes to that first rep. But then objectively we can start to compare the first rep to some other repetitions, because sometimes their second and third rep are faster than their first. So, then we have, loss of efficiency somewhere in the first rep that we're not getting in the first rep, but we're getting the second and third. And that's pretty common with powerlifting, that people's second rep is always better. But so then I guess that gives us another form of measurement. But we only compare the first repetition for all our
that's interesting.
ranges. Yeah.
Yeah, so mainly with the zones that I see, you've probably seen Brian Mann's zones that he developed for Division 1 athletes in the US. So they're like a broad sort of range, and I mean, like Gus, it varies depending on what exercise you're doing. So for like a bench pull, I think the slowest speed you can go generally for an average athlete is like 0.5, which is actually quite high. You know what I mean? But some athletes like Chris Duffin can grind out a squat at 0.06, like super slow speeds. So I think it does depend on the athlete. The athletes that I normally work with, they generally hang around the range of 0.7 to 0.9. Or it actually depends on what training phase they're in. So if they're looking to develop power, it's generally around that. That's the zones that I see quite often, 0.7 to 0.9. They might go through a speed block and they're just working on quick, snappy stuff, and they're working between 1 and 1.3 meters per second. So yeah,
Are they working with averages, and what kind of rep ranges and stuff are they using?
So for compounds, they're just working with averages. So for your squats, deads, bench, all those sort of exercises, it's just averages. And then for peak velocity, there's obviously different zones. Because for Olympic lifts, you guys obviously don't do any of that stuff because you're just concentrating on the 3 main ones. But in team sports, Olympic lifts are very common. And then they have a whole new sort of range, which is quite a bit higher. So it's not uncommon to see speeds like 2.6 meters per second, 2.8.
That's quick. And that's at the peak of the movement as well, isn't it?
Yeah, the peak. So the mean velocity is the average from the start to the finish, and then the peak is just the fastest, quickest point in that movement. So for an Olympic lift, there's like 3 different phases. There's the initial pull from the floor, and the problem with looking at mean velocity for those movements is some athletes are really, really slow to pull the bar off the floor, and some are quite quick. So if you're pulling the bar off the floor quite quickly and you're getting it up really fast, you're going to have a better mean velocity, but it doesn't actually, it's not a good indicator of the actual lift itself, because the most important part, I think, is once you get that bar past your knees, how quickly you can get that bar up. So peak velocity is a better sort of metric to look at there.
So is it in the clean they're trying to look for the highest peak velocity?
Sorry?
Is it in the clean that they look for the highest peak velocity? When
clean snatches, any Olympic variation.
So is it in the clean? I mean, is the peak velocity? So where are they finding the peak velocity? Is it in the, let's say in the clean and press? Are they looking within the movement of the clean or in the press?
The clean. The clean. Okay. Yeah. So
that's generally people's weakest point, would you say?
Yeah. So it's just in the clean phase. Yeah.
Okay. So are most people using this for would you say for injury prevention?
Yeah, for sure.
Or are they using it for performance development in any way?
So it can be used for both, right? Like we have, obviously, if you're using this every day with your athletes, you can get a pretty good idea of how they're tracking. Because with the GymAware system, it's tracking everything stored to the cloud. So it is injury prevention, right? Because you're tracking them the whole time. So, like, we have physios that use it for rehabilitation purposes. You know, they can measure the difference between left and right. Injury prevention. There's a lot of things you can use the GymAware system for, and VBT for, I guess. There's a lot of things Velocity can sort of tell you in that regard.
I think what I've noticed is that it just kind of enhances the information that we're currently using. That, like with injury prevention and powerlifting, that we know that if you're hitting near maxes or you're fatigued, you're more likely to make a mistake. And that if we are working quite slow at percentages that generally have a higher risk, we're better off backing off for that day to prevent the risk of injury. Because if you have a fatiguing day, if anyone has a fatiguing day, I don't like them to hit heavy, because you're just more likely to be a little less tight somewhere, or just the whole skill behind that lift starts to dissipate.
Yeah. My biggest one when I first started working for the company was, like, I sort of just went to the gym for, you know, fitness, stay healthy, all that sort of stuff. And, like, I would just go to the gym, I'd go through the motions, I'd put, you know, 80 kilos on the bar, bench press, down, up. I'd just kind of pump out the 8 reps. I wouldn't really concentrate on anything. But as soon as you sort of start measuring something and you're getting that feedback, it really increases the intent to lift. And that's what I noticed. And I got massive gains as well, just from having that feedback there and going, okay, make sure you, in the concentric phase, really drive it up. And I think that's probably something you've seen, Gus, with your athletes, and Sarah probably as
Yeah. So,
first started.
I mean, Sarah, have you noticed the difference between the way you approach that bar and what numbers you see on that day?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, what have you seen specifically in terms of, because I have noticed that, you know, I mean, myself, where if I'm lifting at a certain percentage and it should move a certain way and it doesn't move at the speed you want, then you kind of like, what's going on here? I mean, and it starts to change, I guess, your attitude about how you're supposed to approach this bar. So then you start creating more training intent. It's like, it's not moving fast. It should move fast, but it's not. So that we get this, I guess, not just feedback in terms of how we're performing and recovering, but I guess where our mind is at that point in time, because we realize a big part of lifting is maintaining a level of psychology that puts you in the right.
It also goes the other way, because I remember, like, I was using it, and I think I was, like, testing on that day, and I put on, like, 70% or whatever it was, and I lifted it, and the speed was, like, 0.55 or something. And I was like, fuck, that was quick. So then it kind of, like, gave me the confidence to be like, well, sweet, like, I can do this. Like it.
Load her up.
Yeah.
Even I think, have you ever found it at times where it's like you feel shit, but it's moving fast? So it's like, it kind of changes
changes your mindset. You're like, I can do this. Yeah.
The way I think it's got to help is if it's hard to reconcile with yourself if you don't feel up to it, but you're just like forcing yourself to, because you should be able to do it and you get frustrated, right? It's got to be easier if you're getting natural feedback to say, oh, hang on, I shouldn't be. Like, I actually have quantifiable data that says I'm not performing at my best now, so it's okay that I back off. Like, taking weight off for a power lifter is, like, tough, right? Trying to get them to lift less, surely.
Yeah.
All they want to do is throw the weights on.
I think it just depends on the lifter, but yeah, like, I think some people, when they're supposed to lift lighter on that day, then the velocity tells them to do so. Even when, I think I had it with Dan Mahoney, he was also using it, that he was a bit slower that day, but he was due to hit something big, did it anyway, and that lift just fell apart and he hurt himself. And he should have listened to the velocity that day, because in the end it didn't work out. So
he hit the weight, but the technique fell off, and then he actually injured himself.
Yeah,
interesting.
Velocity that day was not where it should be, and I told him.
So you're using this every training session for these athletes?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what is it about the products themselves, Jay, that I know Gus mentioned before that you're kind of like becoming more and more and more popular?
Yeah.
Would you say that you're the market leader? Is that right to say? Or
So, GymAware is definitely the market leader. It's the gold standard. It's kind of what everyone uses if they have the budget for it. It is an expensive system. I mean, one unit's about $2,500 Australian, and then you need an iPad. For a team like an NFL team, they need like 20 units. So it's quite an expensive piece of technology, but it is so valuable. And originally we were just selling the GymAware unit, so we only sort of had that, pro teams, researchers. We had that top level market cornered, and then what happened is some other competitors came into the market and they started selling to, individuals, semi-pro teams, high schools, colleges, all that sort of stuff that didn't have the budget to buy GymAware. So we sort of thought, okay, we need to sort of get a product out there that is still super accurate. That's sort of our company's main goal. Unfortunately, there are products on the market that aren't accurate, which means essentially what that means is if you're lifting at a certain speed, you can't really rely on the data. So that's something that GymAware and Flex, our new product, if you see something's moving at 0.4, you can trust those numbers. You can go, okay, yep, I can make coaching decisions. I can program based off these numbers. So that's where our products sort of strive, is that they're super accurate. They're becoming more and more popular now that Flex is a more affordable option. Like, it connects straight to your phone. You can just plug it in, attach it to the bar, and away you go. You just start lifting. It tracks all your data. And it's for individuals, I think it's a really good product. I don't know, Gus, you probably have some thoughts on it.
The GymAware is better. I think it's very. I think it's just a little bit more precise. I think when we had a talk, there's that, there can be like about a 5%.
Yeah,
about
5%.
So yeah. But they're not seem to be, I guess it's just hit and miss. So it's been definitely the GymAware is a lot more, I find, a lot more consistent. I think with powerlifting, especially because we're really define those numbers into a very short, very small range. I think if you're working in a range large enough, let's say, I think even say 0.1 to 0.05, it tends to be pretty good. And, we generally have about that much of a range anyway. So it tends to do its job for what we're doing. So I think it is a good enough. It's definitely not as accurate as the GymAware, but it's definitely good enough for training. Definitely more than good enough, I would say, to tell you what you need to know to make it. But like you said, you had the other device for researchers as well, and that's where it's I guess at another level of accuracy that they need.
Yeah, it's the only system that corrects for angle as well, or the Flex does as well. But there's a lot of other systems that don't correct for the angle. So yeah, it's one of those things, like you need a device that's accurate and that you can rely on. So that's where our products come in. We tried to make the Flex super easy to use. So like, Gus, I ran you through the GymAware system. It's pretty complex. For an individual, it's quite a lot to take on board. So yeah, with the Flex, we just try to make it super, super easy. You literally just plug it on the bar and away you go. But yeah, it does have a bit more error. You see a bit more variability within the numbers. But yeah, like you were saying, it's more than good enough to sort of get some numbers that you can work with.
And affordable for. I mean, it's affordable for people training by themselves, right?
Yeah, it gives you the
awesome,
especially if you're doing it over. If you're working on averages, just anything statistically. I mean, if you're measuring 5 sets, I mean, that's enough to know. That's enough to know where that athlete's going. So
It's got to be dangerous though. If there's products out there that are pretty wide of the mark, and you're making informed decisions about informed data, that's potentially dangerous, right? Like you're taking people where they shouldn't go.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And originally, all the professional teams, when this couple of these products came out, they all tried them out, and they're like, "Yeah, cool," but they just can't get the level of accuracy that we can get because we are measuring. It's a physical measure, displacement over time. So the GymAware is a tethered unit. The Flex uses lasers, whereas some of the other systems they use cheaper technology. So, like for example, there are accelerometer-based systems. So they calculate acceleration, which is a bit variable, and then they try and use that to predict what the velocity would be based off that. So they work backwards, whereas we calculate velocity and then we can work out a whole range of things from that. So that's the main difference. Yeah.
I guess that's what's setting you guys apart from competitors at the moment.
And I think the Flex, it just needs some time. Like it's quite a new product. We launched it late last year. So it's going to take time for people to sort of pick it up and actually realize how good it is. And I think it's we have a lot in the development pipeline, Gus. You've already seen we've introduced a whole bunch of features. So
what's in development?
Sorry?
What's in development? What's upcoming?
What's up and coming? Well, we're putting in video, so that will be next. So you can record each lift and it can play back and we'll overlay the data. I don't want to get into it too much, but big things on the way.
That's cool.
We're really trying to build out the community aspect of it. So Gus, for yourself, you're moving into an online platform. So you already know you can sort of track all your athletes if they have a Flex device in the community section, and we're just trying to build that out. So I think there might be a few things coming on that, like where you can sort of push workouts to athletes and those sort of things. So yeah.
How'd you go with the 1RM calculating for powerlifting and the
so that's
talked about
one, right? You've obviously.
Do they end up using some of the strategies
Sorry.
Do they end up using some of the strategies that?
Yeah. So it's a difficult one. Like we introduced that powerlifting mode. Did you have a play around with that?
Yeah, and then I had a chat to the developers and about some of its issues that I picked up on.
Yeah, so we've dropped for everyone that doesn't know, Flex has an inbuilt 1RM prediction. So essentially what it does is if you know roughly what your 1RM is, it will take 50% of that and take you from 50 all the way to 80. So it's a sub-maximal test. And then like Gus was explaining before, it plots a linear regression curve. And if we know what you lift certain weights at certain speeds, we can kind of predict what your 1RM will be. The problem with powerlifters is they move pretty slowly. So it's hard for us to get a good idea of what their 1 rep max will be. So our problem is we have to introduce all these algorithms and sort of set out the tests. So one of the rules we initially had was 50% of your 1 rep max should roughly, this is what the research says for most team sport athletes, 50% of your 1 rep max will be about 1 meter per second. So for powerlifters, that's just, I don't know, Sarah, have you ever moved 1 meter per second?
I don't think so.
No. So okay, we're like, okay, what can we do for powerlifters? So one of Gus's sort of ideas was start them heavier because they're used to lifting heavy weights. So that's another thing we had to deal with, right? Novice athletes coming in using the system for the first time. We don't want to expose them to those heavy weights. So, it would, like, obviously in an ideal world, it would be best to start them off heavier, but we can't really do that just because there are so many different things that we have to worry about. But for powerlifter mode, they start off at 60%, so they go heavier to start, and they end up at about 90%. So we take them further. And Gus, since our chat, I think we've lowered that threshold down to 0.5 in powerlifter mode. So 50%, you have to move at about 0.5, 60%, sorry. So
I tend to measure that we're not getting any accurate speeds until we're about 70% anyway, because the velocity tends to kind of be a little bit all over the place until they're actually hitting loads that they're used to hitting.
Yeah. I think what we've done now is we've dropped off in the calculation. We're only using the last 3, potentially. That could be what we're doing now in powerlifter mode. So yeah,
to create the model.
Sorry.
So the last 3 to create the model, to create the linear regression.
Last 3 or 4, yeah. And obviously, yeah.
I find that a bit short.
How many points do you use on that curve?
I use 9.
9, yeah. It's quite an extensive test.
Yeah, well, you'll generally get a few outliners in that one as well. Especially I found in the squat, and the bench press too, because the bench press didn't seem to have a very narrow band as well. So their 60% would be like say 0.5, and then their 90. Let's say your 60% would be 0.4, and it'll be 0.3 at 80%. So it was only like there's like a 20% range, but only a decrease in 0.1.
I know, which makes it super hard on our end because we're like, okay, we probably need more data points in there. So maybe something we have to think about is instead of doing a 1RM test for powerlifters, maybe we just get them to do a force velocity profile.
Yeah, so that's what I was suggesting before, is that let them hit all their numbers, and then you plot the regression model on top of that, rather than making predictions of where their velocity should be for a percentage range.
Yeah, that's one idea I did have. I don't think the development team liked it, but what can you do? Yeah, it is hard for powerlifters, man, and I think it's interesting because, like you were saying to me one day, like you lifted 50%, let's just say 60% at 0.5, and then you went and lifted 70% at 0.55 or something. You're actually increasing in speed as load gets heavier. So I'm just like, how do you even plot that as a
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I said, that comes back to that training intent, or just general nervous system activation. Powerlifters aren't lifting maximally at maximal speeds until they're like friggin' 8th set in sometimes. Yeah.
So one thing we do recommend is a warm up. I don't know if you've read much about post activation potentiation, but yeah. So if you do sort of do this test, we do sort of suggest quite a decent warm up. I normally do about a 15-minute warm up, with varying ranges to sort of get myself warm, have a lot of rest in between. That's how I maximize my sort of results and my speeds. So maybe that's something, I don't know. Would you do that warm up before you do your test, or do you do it with the lowest?
So with in a few ways. So when outside velocity training, I've always, for some people, had to have kind of activation sessions, pre deadlift or something, to start until they feel good. Start the nervous system activated, or even to the point where they might do some heavy rack deadlifts before coming back down to off the floor. But not everyone needed that. But what I've been doing with velocity is that if you're working at say 50-60%, until we're close, we kind of stuck around there until we came close to the velocity. So we know where I guess the nervous system is starting to become more active. And then once we're kind of within range with that velocity, then we started to just add the load.
Yeah.
That's kind of one thing I was doing with them. But yeah.
Like I have a powerlifter friend, and he can bench like 160, 180 kilos. But if I just put the bar on him, there's no way he's lifting above 0.7. So in my head, I'm just like, okay, what does that come down to? Is it just he can't lift it, or is it just like a mindset thing? What are your sort of thoughts on that? Like maybe Sarah, I don't know. Do you like Sarah? How much can you bench?
160.
160, right? Okay, so you can bench a lot. If I was to put 30 kilos on a bar, do you think you could lift it at 1 meter per second, or is it just you're locked in you're focusing on form. You know what I mean?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably I couldn't. I'd be. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think I could do like one.
Yeah, you'd be sacrificing the tension you're creating to get more speed, because you start using your elasticity to kind of create momentum. So we would go through I think if you're going over 1 meter per second, you're going through a throw movement than a press movement.
Yeah.
So
pretty much. Yeah.
So
there's a decelerating phase in there. So
yeah.
Yeah, like I know that like a certain powerlifter, Laura Scrow in Sydney, she did a 6-week phase where she only lifted below 80% of her 1 rep max. And at the start, the coach was like trying to drill into her. It's all about speed. It's all about speed. And she just couldn't get it. And then eventually she finally got it, started lifting. And like, I didn't study like anatomy or physiology or anything, but I think the reason why she had massive gains is something to do with like muscle recruitment and like the way the fibers are broken down. So like, if you're only training type 1 muscle fibers as a powerlifter, I think speed is like an important part, like to obviously create, fast twitch muscle fibers, like, explosive power. I don't know, Gus, what are your sort of thoughts on?
I think this comes back to the just general strength and conditioning principles of phase potentiation, but in a different area. Because I mean something basic, like we know, general muscular hypertrophy should carry over to or potentiate strength. I guess this is just another area that we're trying to focus on velocity at various percentages that would carry over to more force production and higher percentages, or potentiate more load and high percentages.
I wonder if you could. There would be a correlation between, say, box jumps and squat gains, or is it? I mean, I know it's true the other way around.
I think this might be too far away from the spectrum of what we're trying to achieve. I don't personally. I mean, it could be different. Research could show differently, but I don't think there's much more to gain than less than 60%.
Okay.
When it comes to strength training, if you can increase velocity at 60 to 70%, there could be a carryover. So there'll be less from 60% than 70%, and more from 80% than 70. So, I mean, I guess this comes down to specificity.
Do you do much work around those ranges, 60, 70%?
Yeah. I think more advanced they are, the more so is the case, because we generally lose a lot more strength compared to our competition lifts. So I would start, a new phase. Let's say, coming out of lockdown, I started a new phase where we had a range of like 65 to 70%, and it's very far off the mark in terms of what I'm capable of doing, but my velocities are a lot slower at that point. And so for someone else, in terms of, I guess, perceived intensity or rate of perceived intensity would be, nearly close to like, a max, like 80% or 90, 80, 85%. They're quite hard. Now those velocities are starting to increase. Now I can start to increase load. But I think it just depends on the level of athlete as well. Yeah. So
Sarah, how long have you been a powerlifter for?
It's my 6th year this year.
6 year, okay. And since how long have you been doing velocity-based training for?
It was just the last 6 months. It was like my last comp prep we started, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was quite good.
Yeah, it's definitely a better way to train. I think it's more engaging and you actually have fun. That's one thing I definitely realised. But like, were you always increasing, or did you sort of plateau at all, or?
I think majority it was increasing. There was a few slower days when I had like high workload days and all that sort of stuff, which was, again, it was good to see. I was supposed to do like a heavy day, and my ranges were slow, so I pulled it back and didn't over fatigue myself. So it was good.
No, yeah, I definitely think in powerlifting, velocity-based training is going to be a huge aspect. I mean, it is already. Like Gus, you're using it.
I think it's going to be a game changer. I think if you're not into it in the next couple of years as a coach, I mean, you're going to be left behind. That's what I personally believe anyway.
That's why you're going to be the VBT Australia guy for powerlifting.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah. Get him in the door, yeah. Bloody hell. So where did you go from in that 6 months again? From and to, in terms of your gains?
Oh, my squat went from like 230 to 257.
That's awesome.
And VBT was pretty much the only thing we really changed. Hey.
Yeah.
And at the elite end of the spectrum, that's like a lot to gain.
So we applied the exact same strategy I did in terms of programming that we did at Showdown, which is the competition we did prior to that. And we made some good gains. So we figured out a strategy that worked well for her, but I mainly replaced one aspect of it, which was the one aspect of it with velocity, and used that to dictate load, and there was a significant difference. So we basically got to replicate the same methodology of programming twice, but the second time around applying velocity, and it just because that competition you added 5 or 10 kilos in the first one, and then in the second one we added like 30 kilos.
Insane.
And even my bench, like that.
You got 152 at one competition. So in 2018 she got 157, and then we haven't been able to get that strength back for some time. We applied a methodology, the same methodology with same with the VBT, but without it. And we got up to 152, so it was still about 5 kilos off. And we're struggling for like 2 years to get that back. We applied velocity, and then after that, got 161, which is the unofficial all-time Australian record. So now we just got to get that.
And it was in the gym.
It was in the gym, yeah. So we just get that in competition.
Times do you train, Sarah? Like a week?
Sorry, was that?
How many times do you train in the gym a week?
3 or 4.
3 or 4. Okay.
3 or 4 days, yeah.
Yeah, and how, like, this is one thing that I'm just interested in. Like, how much rest do you have in between sets?
Depending, like, on the day and how heavy it is and stuff, but usually about 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah. And do you set those times, Gus? Like, is that part of the program? Like, how long they have?
I generally suggest people taking the 5 to 7 mark for the really heavy stuff, and keeping it under 5 minutes for the lighter stuff. So I don't set a timer. I kind of stay on top of them in terms of trying to regulate that themselves. So yeah. But they already know too, if they rest too long, they'll slow down, and if they rest too short, they won't recover. So
it's a fine line.
I feel athletes tend to build an intuition with their rest periods. So I rather rely on their intuition. My rule of thumb is like, when you feel 90% recovered, then go again. You never want to feel fully recovered. You never really will.
Yeah. 3 years later, still waiting for the next set.
Yeah. I went into a gym in Melbourne and they were having like 15 minutes in between sets. Couldn't believe it. I was just like, oh my God. But I think they were talking around and mucking around a little bit.
12-hour sessions.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
15 minutes.
All powerlifters, yeah, it tends to be.
Especially when you're squatting, I think.
Yeah, squatting's the long one. Squatting's an event. It's just so much preparation for squats. It's just not it's not one of those, like bench and deads, you can come in, you can rip some weight off the floor or just get under the bar. But squats is I guess a mind fuck game, and the thing that can hurt you the most, and everyone just hates it.
There's that bit when you step back off the rack and you just stood there and you're like, fuck, I gotta commit, and you're like, yeah. Jesus. Awesome, man. So where do you have any quantifiable kind of results that any of these pro teams, again, do you work with any NFL teams? You said the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah. So LA Rams, Philadelphia Eagles, Denver Broncos, like they're about 15 of them, so half.
Wow, yeah, okay.
You said you're doing some, I think we had a small conversation before, you're saying they're doing some pretty mind-blowing kind of innovative things now. What are they doing?
Just for a rough idea, like Aaron Donald won Defensive Player of the Year. So he's incline benching 200 kilos at 0.5. Like
Fuck.
seriously, like you're just like, oh my god. Yeah, so like a lot of those guys, they bench 100 kilos at over 1 meter per second. And they're like, you're going in there and you're just like, wow. And even the college guys as well. You go into the gym, they're like 6'10". They're just massive. They're fast. Like, it's a different world over there. It's pretty crazy. Like, moving heavy weights. Like, I could bench 100 kilos maybe twice, and they're doing it at over 1 meter per second. I'm just like, wow.
Well, one of their combine tests out of college is max reps at 100 kgs. And some of them are doing it 45, 50. I can't remember. I think the record's like 55 or something crazy. So maybe it's because they're training at that weight so much that they're getting the velocity there.
Seriously, yeah. We're involved in the NHL combine. So it's interesting. For the NFL, they just do max reps at 100 kilos. But for the NHL, which is hockey, ice hockey, they take their athlete's body weight, they halve it, and they put that weight on the bar, and then it's max velocity. So they actually have the GymAware hooked up, and I think it's actually a way better way to sort of do it. It makes things interesting, right? So the commentators like commentating on the GymAware and like what's happening, and I think it's great. Like we're trying to get into the NFL draft, but it's quite traditional. So they have their set tests, the 40-yard dash, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, but you never know. You might see it. You might see the GymAware on the bar soon.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't get the NFL draft, the combine. They practice like 90% of the stuff they practice. Half the positions never do in an actual game. It's been done that way for 40 years or whatever. Like they do a 3-cone drill, don't they, for agility and.
Yeah. So right now, we're actually seeing a lot of the traditional coaches in the NFL phased out. And so you get these young tech guys coming up who are like assistants and stuff, and they're bringing in GymAwares and they're tracking everything. They've got the heart rate monitors, the force plates. So it's starting to change. The NFL, in my opinion, in America was the slowest to sort of adapt to the technology. But now, like Gus was saying, if you're not using this stuff in the next few years, like you're just going to be left behind. Not only with powerlifting, but definitely team sports as well. Yeah.
100%.
It's a good time to get on it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, before everyone else leaves you behind.
Like for yourself, like if a powerlifter's listening to this, what do you recommend they do? Like say they pick up a VBT device, what would be the first thing to do besides like obviously contact yourself? Would it be to set up that?
There's so little information because I had one of my athletes go ahead and use it, and we haven't done anything. She kind of just started playing around with it herself, and the information that's out there is on more on those zones, and it doesn't apply to powerlifting. So I think it's just one of those things. It's just at the moment at this stage, and I guess hoping this is something that I can do, is that provide, I guess, information to people about how to apply this to powerlifting specifically. I think that especially number one thing is that there's a little bit less about it. So it does help dictate load, but it can't dictate all your training. It can't dictate your program. It has to, we use it, I tend to tell people it's just another measuring tool that can help, make adjustments that are best suited to you at that time and over time. I think this is something that probably will take time to develop, that you'll need to see someone who can provide this information for you to apply it to your training. I think in terms of something really simple that you probably could do right now is do your current program and measure the velocity that you do. And you can start to compare velocity with loads that you're using. And that can start to give you, I guess, another form of auto-regulation or a form of biofeedback. So instead of using a subjective measurement like 8.5 RPE, you can use a velocity as your auto feedback without using it to dictate load. You just use it to actually just measure its intensity or its velocity for that day. And just from that data alone, you should be able to start making some intelligent changes. I always say, and this is I think what people are trying to do, is they're trying to take velocity as an entire new method. It's not. It's just measuring what we're already doing, and just takes a little bit more intelligently with more data to, I guess, view, because velocity is not going to be the only data we use. We're going to use everything like we have always used. So it's enhancing what we're already doing, I would say, yeah.
So you still really to get the most benefit, you need to find a coach, really.
The thing is, there aren't many coaches that are doing this.
That's what I'm saying, right? So
come see me.
Yeah. Call Gus on 07.
No, that definitely is my suggestion, is just start tracking what you're doing. If you're new to doing this, and you'll get valuable data from that.
Yeah, definitely. So you wouldn't recommend setting up a force velocity profile?
I think this is the thing. Yeah, I definitely 100% recommend doing it. I think it's just I think it's one of those things that people don't understand how to.
You don't trust the ability of the lifter to apply it properly.
I don't think most people know what linear regression is.
Yeah, true.
So,
what is linear regression, Gus?
It's just a prediction model using statistics. So you kind of plot a graph comparing load and velocity, and it can create basically a linear line from point A to point B, and that gives you predict a XY value for what percentage we want to work at, and then you can then use that formula if it's accurate. So again, you use that model to try an accurate model, which you would use an R-square value, which most Excel spreadsheets can calculate for you. And if it's a good R-square value, then you know it is quite accurate to use. And then you can plot from 60% to 100% exactly what velocity you need to use. So then when you program 80%, you should know what your velocity is. So definitely, if you have the capacity to do that, to create a force velocity profile, then do that.
Is this your idea for the app? Is this your idea for the like what the app?
That's another idea.
I was going to say, like, as soon as you can start making it idiot proof, velocity in spits out data the other way, and it just informs you. Then it's like gold rush.
Just so everyone knows as well, like GymAware does this on the cloud automatically, but you know, if you don't have a GymAware unit, I'm sure, Gus, you would have a spreadsheet, wouldn't you? So if you were coaching an athlete and they were on board, they would get access to the spreadsheet, and you would be able to run them through all that stuff.
Yeah, I guess what I'll do is I can provide a link to I guess a model that can help you create a linear regression model, which I'll post when we post this that people can download and just create their own force velocity profile.
And you have to do that for the 3 exercises because it is exercise specific.
Yeah. It's different for each person and for each exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Like Usain Bolt is going to be different to Mo Farah. So at the end of the day, it is, you do need to specialize it. The zones are just a good guide for most athletes, most team sport athletes. But for powerlifters, like you're saying, they don't really get above 0.5. And, it just is what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we're coming up on the hour mark, so we probably won't keep you any longer.
Well, yeah, if anyone has any questions or anything, feel free to shoot them my way. I'm sure, Gus, you'll probably leave something into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll leave some information, description about the software, about the device and stuff, and people want to have a crack at it and give it a go. And
I'm interested, and I'm just a hobbyist, so
For sure.
I think so.
It definitely mixes up training, changes the way you think about training, you know. So, yeah, if anyone's keen, definitely shoot us a message.
I got a discount code. Was it Muscle 10 you made?
For sure. Yeah.
Was it 10% or was it 5% off or something like that?
It'll be in the description.
Yeah, in the
I'll-
description.
Throw it all in. Awesome. All right, Jay. Well, mate, really appreciate you having a chat with us. Fascinating stuff.
Hey, you guys are
Loved it, mate.
on. It's awesome to talk with you guys. Sure, we'll.
No worries, mate. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.